What if I told you that one country's budget mischief triggered a debt crisis that shook Europe and nearly tore the European Union apart? Greece, known for producing some of the greatest thinkers, wars, and culture in human history, its legacy is cemented for having one of the most iconic ancient civilizations. However, in the span of a few years, the country went from the excitement of joining the European Union and hosting the Olympics to complete economic collapse. But what exactly caused Greece to have Europe's worst debt crisis in the modern day, and could it have been avoided? Let's start in 1999. Europe is riding high on post-Cold War optimism, and the European Union introduces a revolutionary idea: a single currency to unite the continent economically and politically. No more exchanging francs for Deutschmarks or currency fluctuations hurting trade. Just one currency, the euro, to bind Europe together. But there was a catch. To join this exclusive Euro club, countries had to meet strict criteria known as the Maastricht criteria, with a budget deficit below 3% of GDP, total debt below 60% of GDP, and also needed to maintain low inflation. And these rules were designed to ensure only financially stable countries could adopt the euro. For most of Europe, this was challenging but achievable. For Greece, it would be nearly impossible. In the late 1990s, Greece's economy was a mess. Tax evasion was rampant, with an estimated 1/3 of economic activity going unreported. And government spending was out of control. Public sector jobs were handed out freely to political supporters, and the number of public employees rapidly rose. Meanwhile, the debt-to-GDP ratio averaged over 102% from 1981 to 1993, nearly double the allowed limit. Greece faced a lose-lose choice: either undertake painful reforms and spending cuts to meet the criteria, or painfully watch from the sidelines as the rest of Europe moved forward without them. Missing out on the euro meant economic isolation, higher borrowing costs, and the humiliation of being left behind. Greece chose the third option: cheat. Enter Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street giant known for creative problem-solving. In 2001, Goldman presented Greece with an elegant solution to their impossible problem.
Our debt is 105%. The euro limit is 60%. Can you help?
We can use cross-currency swaps to move debt off your balance sheet.
That sounds illegal.
It's not illegal, it's financial engineering. Our fee is around 300 million euros. Using complex financial instruments called currency swaps, Goldman helped Greece move billions in debt off its balance sheet. On paper, Greece's deficit looked small enough to meet EU requirements. In reality, Greece was simply hiding its debt through accounting tricks, borrowing money disguised as currency trades with the real costs pushed years into the future. And it worked, and Greece adopted the euro on January 1st, 2001. The early years felt like a dream come true, and people were optimistic. Borrowing costs plummeted, with the euro's credibility backing Greek bonds. Investors treated Greek debt almost as if it were German debt. Money flooded into Athens. The government ramped up spending on public sector salaries, pensions, and infrastructure. Then came the ultimate showcase. Greece won the bid to host the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens. This was it, a chance to show the world that modern Greece could revive its ancient glory. The nation was electric with pride. The price tag? Over 9 billion euros, nearly double the original budget. But with cheap credit flowing and euphoria in the air, who was counting? For ordinary Greek citizens, these were golden years. The economy was booming, jobs were everywhere, and after decades of being seen as Europe's poor cousin, Greece finally felt like its moment had arrived. By the mid-2000s, Greeks were enjoying a standard of living they'd never experienced before. Wages rose, consumer spending boomed, the future looked bright. But underneath the surface, the fundamentals were rotten. Tax collection remained abysmal, government bloat continued unchecked, productivity lagged far behind Northern Europe, and the debt kept mounting, hidden beneath layers of innovative accounting. Soon, the bill would come due. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Banks collapsed, credit markets froze. For Greece, the timing couldn't have been worse. Tourism, one of Greece's leading industries, collapsed as recession-wary travelers stayed home. Shipping revenues dried up and tax receipts plummeted even further. And suddenly, Greece needed to borrow even more money to make up for its collapsing tax revenues just as global lenders were getting nervous. Then things would go from bad to worse. In October 2009, Greece's newly elected government revealed the truth. Previous administrations had been systematically lying about the country's finances. Credit rating agencies downgraded Greek bonds to junk status, and interest rates on Greek debt skyrocketed. Suddenly, Greece couldn't afford to borrow money at any price. Finally, Greece's updated numbers. Deficit at 6%, debt manageable. Actually, small recalculation. The deficit is closer to 12.7%, and we may have used some creative accounting with Goldman Sachs. You've been lying to us for a decade. Lying is such a harsh word. We prefer optimistically interpreting fiscal data, and about that debt, we're going to need some help. By early 2010, Greece was on the brink of default. If Greece couldn't pay its massive debts, European banks holding billions in Greek bonds would take massive losses. The crisis could spread to Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Italy. The entire Eurozone could collapse. The Troika, which consisted of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, stepped in with a historic rescue package, 110 billion euros to keep Greece afloat. But the money came with brutal strings attached. The Troika believed that fiscal discipline would restore confidence, bring debt under control, and set Greece on a path to recovery. The theory sounded reasonable, but the results in reality were catastrophic. As Greece hiked taxes and slashed spending, the economy contracted sharply. With less government money flowing through the economy, businesses struggled, unemployment soared, and tax revenues collapsed even further. The debt-to-GDP ratio, which austerity was supposed to reduce, actually worsened as the economy shrank faster than the debt fell. GDP fell by 7% in 2011 alone. Unemployment hit 18% and kept climbing. Thousands of businesses closed. Young Greeks fled the country in search of work abroad, and yet the debt kept ballooning. Greece was caught in a death spiral. Austerity caused a recession. The recession reduced tax revenue, and lower revenue led to more austerity. The antidote had become the poison. Now, Greece wasn't the first country to suffer this fate. Across the Atlantic, Argentina had endured a similar debt crisis just a few years earlier. In the early 2000s, Argentina followed IMF-imposed austerity measures, slashing pensions, cutting government salaries, raising taxes. The result? Economic catastrophe. The harsh measures deepened Argentina's recession, making debt repayment even harder and trapping the country in a vicious cycle it still hasn't escaped. Since 1956, Argentina has defaulted 9 times and entered 21 separate IMF programs. The pattern was identical. Debt crisis, austerity demands, economic collapse, repeat. Yet somehow, when Greece's turn came, European leaders and the IMF prescribed the exact same medicine, expecting different results. By 2012, it was clear Greece needed even more help. The Troika arranged a second bailout, 130 billion euros combined with a historic debt restructuring. Private creditors holding Greek bonds agreed to accept a 50% haircut, writing off half of what they were owed. It was the most extensive sovereign debt restructuring in history. More austerity followed. Pension cuts deepened. Taxes rose again. Public services were gutted. Healthcare budgets were slashed. Schools closed. On the ground, Greek society was collapsing. Unemployment reached 27.5% in 2013, one of the highest rates ever recorded in a developed country in peacetime. Youth unemployment hit an apocalyptic 58%. Nearly 1 in 3 Greeks fell below the poverty line. Soup kitchens appeared in Athens, feeding tens of thousands who used to be middle class. An entire generation saw their futures evaporate. The social fabric was torn apart as protests and riots broke out. Far-right and far-left parties surged in popularity. The Greek people felt betrayed by their own government, by Europe, by the banks, by everyone. The human cost of the crisis was staggering. Greece's economic disaster turned into a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the heart of Europe. By 2015, Greeks had endured 5 years of brutal austerity with no end in sight. They were exhausted, angry, and desperate for change. In January 2015, they elected Syriza, a far left-wing party that promised to end austerity and renegotiate the bailout terms with Europe. Their message was simple. Greece had suffered enough. The Troika's medicine had failed. It was time to demand a better deal. For months, Greece's new government negotiated with European leaders, demanding debt relief and an end to austerity. Europe refused to budge. Banks began hemorrhaging deposits as Greeks feared the worst. Capital controls were imposed. Greeks could only withdraw €60 per day from ATMs. Then, in June 2015, Greece did the unthinkable. It missed a €1.6 billion payment to the IMF, becoming the first developed country to default on an IMF loan. The Greek banking system froze. Europe faced a choice: let Greece collapse and risk contagion across the continent, or offer one more lifeline. After tense all-night negotiations, a third bailout was arranged, €86 billion. But the conditions were even harsher than before. The dream of defying austerity had failed. Greece had no choice but to accept the deal and continue down the painful path to recovery. By the time the dust settled, Greece's economy had shrunk by 25%, a contraction rivaled only by the Great Depression. Debt to GDP peaked above 180%, higher than at the start of the crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks had emigrated, and an entire decade had been lost. So what went wrong? Well, first, Greece's original sin was fiscal mismanagement and fraud, driven by a fixation on the immediate short-term win of adopting the euro at any cost, even by cheating. Hiding debt through Goldman Sachs swaps, cooking the books, and ignoring structural problems created a house of cards destined to collapse. Second, the Eurozone's design had structural flaws that constrained weaker balance sheets. Countries sharing a currency couldn't adjust exchange rates or print money during crises. Greece was stuck with a one-size-fits-all monetary policy designed for powerhouse economies like Germany, not for its own very different needs. Third, austerity during a recession is economic malpractice. Cutting spending and raising taxes in the middle of an economic downturn doesn't restore confidence, it deepens the recession. Greece needed stimulus and investment, not austerity. But the Troika, dominated by creditor nations worried about moral hazard, demanded harsh cuts anyway. Finally, when you prioritize saving banks over helping people, you get political chaos. The bailouts rescued European banks holding Greek debt, but ordinary Greek citizens paid the price. Greece officially exited its bailout programs in 2018, but the scars remain. Unemployment, though improved, is still high. Debt remains crushing. An entire generation lost its prime earning years. Greece's slow recovery proves that economies can survive near-death experiences, but prevention is better than a cure. Strong institutions with sound fiscal policy, transparency, and accountability are not only foundations of economic stability, but also human prosperity and well-being. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our previous video covering Japan's lost decades and how a promising superpower that seemed to have everything going for it fell into decades-long stagnation. And we'll see you guys there.